The unforgiving steel deck of the Serafina's Folly pitched and slammed like a cornered leviathan, each violent shudder flinging a fresh, stinging deluge of Pacific spray across Serafina's face, tasting of salt and the metallic tang of fear. Hours ago, the yacht's sleek mahogany and polished chrome symbols of Luther's suffocating opulence had felt like a gilded cage. Now, as the sky wept and the sea raged, it was a precipice overlooking an abyss. The memory, sharp and corrosive, clawed at her, the almost silent, chilling click as the secure file icon for Project Tidewash opened on Luther's monolithic desktop. It was an accident, her stumbling upon it, a search for an innocuous financial report. But the contents, a cold, bureaucratic euphemism for the systematic disposal of problematic assets, human beings deemed inconvenient to Vanguard shipping, had frozen her blood. Then came his voice, a sliver of Arctic ice piercing the plush quiet of his study, colder than the wind now tearing at her. Curiosity, my dear Serafina, is a sin cats rarely survive. Did you truly believe your little forays into my private affairs would go unnoticed? The words had been a prelude to this nautical nightmare. He hadn't shouted then, not like he was now, his voice, a venomous snarl slicing through the shriek of the wind, more terrifying than the storm itself. She clung to the gleaming railing, knuckles stark white against the chrome, the cold seeping into her bones. You think you can defy me? He bellowed, his face, usually a mask of glacial, impenetrable control, now a grotesque canvas of fury illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. You pathetic, naive little fool, expose me to whom the authorities I own, the press that fears me. Each word was a shard of ice, honed to wound to break her. You carry my child, you ungrateful whore. You are nothing without me. Do you comprehend the arrogance? Believing those files, irrefutable proof of unfortunate accidents at sea, meticulously documented accounts of human suffering, shattered families, all linked to Vanguard shipping. My company would ever see the light of day with you as their pitiful, insignificant messenger. He lunged then, not with the clumsy rage of an ordinary man, but with the lethal precision of a predator. It was the face she'd seen in fleeting, terrifying glimpses before, when an underling had catastrophically failed, when a business rival had dared encroach upon his empire, when his meticulously ordered world faced even the slightest disruption. But never ever had that raw, unbridled personal hate been directed at her. This was the monster beneath the magnate, the architect, whose empire was built on bones and watered with the tears of the silenced. Her discovery, the damning Project Tidewash folder and its encrypted companion ledgers detailing the true monstrous human cost of his operations, had been her death warrant. He'd given her a chilling smile just moments before on deck. A little sea air will clear your head, my dear. He'd purred his hand on her back. Stop this foolishness. Then the smile had vanished, replaced by that terrifying mask of fury and a brutal, calculated shove. The world fractured, a chaotic, dizzying blur of black, churning Pacific. The yacht's glittering lights shrinking with terrifying, sickening speed, a malevolent eye receding into the storm. An agonized cry, part betrayal, part primal terror, ripped from her throat, swallowed instantly by the insatiable maw of the tempest. Cold, sharper than any surgeon's blade, seared her lungs as she clawed her way to the surface, gasping the acrid taste of diesel and salt water burning her throat. Debris, a piece of a lifebuoy deliberately, professionally slashed and broken. A chilling detail her shock-numbed mind registered with a fresh wave of horror, bobbed tantalizingly just out of reach. Luther's thoroughness, always thorough. Her unborn child, a precious leaden weight, seemed to pull her down into the abyss. No, not like this. Not my baby. The thought was a spark in the overwhelming darkness. Kicking with a desperation born of primal maternal fury, she fought the relentless, frigid grasp of the waves. Time dissolved into a maelstrom of pain, exhaustion, fear, and a single burning resolve to survive. For 2 hours, or perhaps an eternity, bled into one another. Then raw instinct, indomitable and fierce, guided her failing limbs toward a faint mist-shrouded shoreline. A ghostly silhouette of land against a sky still bruised and weeping from the tempest. Dimly, she recalled old sailors' tales, whispers from the Oregon coast about storm hearts, smooth heart-shaped pieces of sea glass, legendarily the ocean's compassionate return of souls. It couldn't bear to keep precious gifts to those who'd endured the unendurable. She clung to that fragile fragment of hope as if it were a raft itself. She washed ashore at dawn, barefoot, breathless, her bones aching with a hypothermia that felt like shattered glass under her skin, her expensive dress, chosen for a dinner she'd never eaten, now in tatters, clinging to her like a shroud. She carried far more than just her unborn child. She carried the fresh, brutal memory of Luther's treachery, the chilling echo of his threat. They'll never even find your bodies, and an iron will forged in the crucible of the unforgiving Pacific. She would survive. They both would. He was Harlan Crow, a man whose heart, much like the rugged Oregon coastline he inhabited, had become weathered, salt-scoured, and profoundly unforgiving. He'd long ago surrendered the notion of saving anyone, least of all himself, after Vanguard shipping, and the merciless sea had stolen his Alara. An accident, they'd called it, a rogue wave. A convenient dismissive explanation. He'd always harbored a sliver of doubt, a cold, persistent knot of unease that tightened whenever Luther Vale's name surfaced, subtly linked to Vanguard, even then, through a labyrinth of shell corporations and whispered rumors. Neither Serafina, clinging to life on his desolate beach, nor Harlan, walking its misty edge, knew that this violent collision of their ravaged fates, beginning with a desperate, near-hopeless rescue, would become the miracle that slowly, painstakingly rewrote their lives, forging a bond stronger than any storm. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable story of redemption, love, and the quiet, unyielding power of kindness, if heartfelt stories like this speak to you, consider subscribing. Your support helps us share more tales that remind us all that healing often begins where the world least expects it, in the hands of strangers and the heart of the wild. Now let's begin. The tide had receded, leaving behind a silver trail of iridescent foam and fractured abalone shells, shimmering remnants of ocean tempests. Mist, thick as a funeral shroud, clung to the damp sand, muffling the plaintive cries of distant gulls and softening the jagged outlines of salt-bleached driftwood. Harlan stood at the turbulent edge of the dunes, hands jammed deep into the pockets of his weathered denim jacket, his breath misting in the chill pre-dawn air. Beside him, Finn, a boy of 12, with eyes that held ancient, unchildlike sorrows, meticulously arranged a mosaic of violet-hued clamshells at the base of a gnarled driftwood sculpture he'd been working on for weeks. He didn't speak much. Finn's silence was a language Harlan understood intimately, a shared vernacular of loss and guarded hope. Until today. Finn froze his small hand, hovering over a perfectly spiraled whelk, and pointed his finger, trembling almost imperceptibly. Tangled in a dark, ominous mass of seaweed and what looked like sodden, expensive-looking black cloth lay a shape. Then, horrifyingly, an arm, slender and pale fingers curled skyward, as if in supplication or a final desperate reach. Harlan's body moved before his mind could fully process the horror. "Stay here, Finn!" He barked, his voice harsher than intended, his worn boots pounding the wet, resistant sand, each stride a jarring impact. Alara's face, pale and lost, flashed before his eyes. Not again. The woman lay face down, her dark hair fanned out like kelp on the sand. He rolled her gently, his movements surprisingly deft for a man of his rough exterior. Ghost pale lips tinged a frightening blue. And pregnant. Heavily, undeniably pregnant. Two trembling, calloused fingers pressed to her icy neck. A pulse. Faint, fragile, miraculously there. A fighter, he thought, a flicker of grim admiration. He scooped her up. She was freezing a dead weight, heavier than she looked. Finn blankets the emergency kit from the truck now. He roared over the crash of the surf. Finn, already a blur of motion, sprinted towards the trailhead where their old pickup was parked. Harlan knelt, cradling her against his own meager warmth, trying to shield her from the biting wind. Her eyelids fluttered. A sliver of dilated, terrified brown met his gaze for a fleeting second. A soft, choked whimper like a wounded animal. "I've got you." Harlan rasped, his voice raw with an unfamiliar protective tenderness that surprised even himself. "You're safe now." The ghost of Alara, another storm, another rescue he couldn't make, chilled him to the core. Vanguard shipping. Luther Vale. The names twisted in his gut like barbed wire, a grim, undeniable premonition. This wasn't just a random castaway. Trouble deep and dangerous had washed up on his shore. The drive back to his Spartan, isolated cabin was an urgent blur, Finn in the passenger seat, anxiously counting a string of smooth worry beads Alara had given him. Bundled in every blanket they possessed, the woman lay on the truck's worn bench seat, occasionally moaning, her breaths shallow. Back at the cabin, Finn, with a competence that belied his years, had a fire crackling in the hearth before Harlan had even laid her gently on his own narrow bed. "What's your name?" Harlan asked softly some time later, brushing damp matted hair from her forehead with a surprisingly gentle touch. Her voice was a thread barely audible. "Syrah, Fina." "I'm Harlan. This is Finn. You washed up on the beach. Do you remember anything?" She blinked slowly, one hand instinctively going to her swollen belly. They pushed me." Small words dark with a universe of violence. A cold dread settled in Harlan's stomach. "Who pushed you, Serafina?" Raw terror flared in her eyes, momentarily chasing away the exhaustion. She clutched his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Please, don't let him find me. He'll kill us. He'll kill us both." Harlan looked at Finn, whose young face, usually clouded with a quiet sorrow, was now resolute, a grim determination etched in his jaw. The boy nodded, once a silent pledge. "You're safe here." Harlan said the words, a promise from a resurrected part of himself he thought long dead. "Whoever they are, they won't get through me. Or Finn." That night, as rain began to hammer the corrugated tin roof with renewed ferocity, Harlan stared into the flickering flames of the fire. Serafina slept an exhausted, fitful sleep, punctuated by whimpers. Finn, unbidden, had made a pallet of blankets on the floor near her bed, a small protective sentinel. Harlan stepped out onto the rickety porch. The sea roared its untamed fury. How many lives had it taken? How many had it against all odds returned? He thought of Vanguard, the complex web of ownership that always seemed to lead, however discreetly, back to Luther Vale. Alara's accident. The unanswered questions. A chilling premonition settled heavily in his chest. If Serafina's "they" was Vale, then his carefully constructed, isolated past was not just knocking, but battering down his door. Whatever power brought her here. He whispered to the storm, his voice swallowed by the wind. "I won't waste this second chance. Alara, I won't fail again." He went back inside, found an old salt-stained lockbox hidden beneath a loose floorboard, removed a worn leather pouch containing a sparse emergency fund, and a small, heavy antique brass key. Morning brought a bruised, tentative peace. Serafina awoke to the unfamiliar comfort of wood smoke, the distant rhythm of the ocean, and the aroma of strong coffee. Finn sat at the small kitchen table, sketching intently in a worn notebook. "You're safe." Harlan rumbled from the stove, his voice less gravelly than the day before. "You remember anything more?" She winced, a hand gingerly touching her ribs. "My ribs ache. The baby." Her voice caught a fresh wave of fear. "She's fine. Strong heartbeat." Harlan reassured her quickly. "I called a nurse friend down in Astoria last night. Couldn't risk the local clinic not knowing who might be asking questions. She talked me through some basic checks. But you'll need to see a proper doctor soon. Real soon." A profound shuddering relief washed over her, followed by a whisper laced with remembered terror. "They tried to kill us. He wanted us dead." He nodded, his expression grim. "You're on the Oregon coast, about 20 miles north of Seaview, if that means anything to you." Images flooded back with sickening clarity. The yacht, the damning files, the venom in Luther's voice, his face contorted with rage, the shove, the endless icy water. "I can't go back," she choked out. "He'll find me. He always finds everyone." "You don't have to." Harlan said, his tone firm, leaving no room for doubt. Later, wrapped in one of his oversized flannel shirts that smelled of pine and wood smoke, cradling a warm mug of oatmeal, Serafina asked, "He's your son?" Indicating Finn with a slight nod. "Sort of," Harlan said, stirring his own coffee. "Took him in after his folks. They had an accident. Boating. He was 8. He didn't miss the slight, almost imperceptible flinch from Finn at the word accident. A shadow passed over the boy's face there and gone in an instant, a flicker of old pain that Harlan had seen before, but never fully understood. "He seems gentle and very brave," Serafina observed, watching Finn carefully add shading to his drawing. "He is. Both. And smart. Sees more than most folks give him credit for." Finn glanced up at Harlan's words, and a rare fleeting smile touched his lips before he returned to his work. "I don't even know what day it is," Serafina murmured, feeling adrift in more ways than one. "Saturday," Harlan supplied. A choked, hysterical laugh escaped her. "Saturday. Of course. I was supposed to testify on Monday, against my husband, Luther Vale." She saw Harlan flinch, then a distinct, sharp intake of breath, a dark flicker in his usually stoic eyes. The connection, whatever it was stronger than she'd thought. "I had copies, evidence, encrypted, in my waterproof satchel. No bag when I found you." Harlan said, his voice flat. "Of course not. He's methodical." Her voice trembled. "He's powerful, Harlan. Untouchable. Money connections that reach into the highest places. People simply disappear when they become inconvenient. And yet you're here." Harlan said, his gaze unwavering, holding hers. "Alive. With that little one still kicking hard enough for me to feel it when I carried you." A surge of something akin to hope, fragile yet fierce, rose in her. "Why are you doing this? Helping me? I could bring him his wrath down on you. On both of you." Harlan leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking softly. "Someone helped me once a long time ago. Didn't pull you from that water just to watch you drown on land, Serafina." He looked towards Finn. Besides, Finn here has a nose for lost causes worth saving. Finn, without looking up, handed her his current drawing. It depicted a woman standing on a wild beach, a tiny baby cradled in her arms, and all around her feet, dozens of smooth, heart-shaped pieces of sea glass glowing faintly. "Storm hearts." He whispered his first direct words to her, his voice surprisingly low and resonant for his age. "The old ones, The coastal tribes, they say the sea gives them back to those who've lost too much to show resilience, to mark a new beginning. Thank you, Finn. She whispered, tears blurring her vision, one tracing a path down her cheek. This boy with his ancient eyes and quiet sorrow understood more than most adults. Days unfolded with a strange, liminal rhythm. Serafina found a fragile solace in the wild, untamed beauty of the Oregon coast. Harlan chopped wood with a relentless energy, his eyes always watchful, scanning the tree line, the desolate stretch of beach. Finn, her quiet shadow, left small treasures for her on the porch railing, intricately patterned sand dollars, sun-bleached driftwood shaped like seabirds, and more storm hearts he'd found during his solitary explorations. She tentatively added waves and a tiny, fiercely burning light in its lamp to Finn's nearly completed sketch of a solitary lighthouse standing defiant against a stormy sea. No rules in art, Finn had told her solemnly when he saw her hesitation. She echoed it back to herself as she drew no rules, a small rebellion, a reclaiming of agency. One afternoon, Harlan returned from a supply run to Seaview. Besides necessities, he'd brought a small bundle of prenatal vitamins, a few soft second-hand maternity clothes, and a small cloth bag of dried lavender. "For your pillow," he said gruffly, avoiding her gaze. "Might help you sleep. The nurse friend said it's good for calming." "You're not what I expected," she confessed later that evening, watching him expertly bank the fire for the night. "Neither are you," he replied, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been the ghost of a smile. That night, as she lay in the quiet darkness, listening to the distant roar of the ocean and the steady breathing of Finn from his palate, the baby kicked 3 firm, reassuring nudges against her palm. "You're safe. We're safe." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she almost believed it. The next morning, she was rocking gently on the old porch swing, a patchwork quilt tucked around her, when Harlan joined her with 2 steaming mugs. "You're good for this place," he said quietly, handing her one. "Heard Finn laugh yesterday. A real laugh. When you dropped that ladle full of chowder and it splattered all over the floor. Haven't heard him laugh like that in over 2 years. Not since." Ilara's name hung unsaid between them, a shared ache. A warmth unexpected and profound spread through her. But the wind, as it often did on this coast, shifted that afternoon. Harlan, his gaze fixed on the seemingly clear western sky, said ominously, "Storm coming." "The weather looks fine," Serafina observed, unpuzzled. "Not that kind of storm," he replied, his eyes mirroring the familiar fear now tightening her own chest. He explained he had to make a quick trip to Seaview, more vitamins, check his P.O. box, a few other essentials. "If anything at all feels wrong," he instructed, his voice low and urgent. "Finn, you know the drill. Emergency bag is packed. Trappers trail to the ranger station. Don't wait for me. The key to the hidden cache by the old growth cedar is behind the loose stone by the hearth." Finn, who had appeared silently beside them, nodded, his young face grim. "I remember Harlan. Every step." In Seaview, old Mr. Abernathy, the usually taciturn postmaster, was disconcertingly inquisitive. "Any unusual visitors up at your remote cabin in Harlan?" He'd asked, his eyes a little too bright, his folksy curiosity ringing false. "Heard tell of a fancy yacht in serious trouble offshore a few days back. Coast Guard's been nosing around." Harlan, with a curt, "Just the usual gulls and fog," brushed him off, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Among the scant mail in his box, one sleek, cream-colored envelope stood out. No return address, elegant, feminine script chillingly familiar. Addressed to Serafina Vale, CEO, General Delivery, Seaview, OR. Cold dread coiled in his stomach, slick and venomous. How Abernathy. The man's suddenly overly friendly demeanor, his probing questions now felt like a greedy, treacherous probe. Vale's reach. It was everywhere. Dusk was settling, painting the sky in bruised hues of purple and gray, when the headlights, powerful modern LEDs, not the dim yellowish glow of Harlan's old truck, cut through the twilight, sweeping across the cabin. A black gleaming SUV, silent and predatory, pulled up where the rough track met Harlan's small clearing. A tall man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, radiating an aura of cold corporate authority, emerged and approached the porch. His smile, when he offered it, was that of a shark scenting blood. Thorne, Luther's chief enforcer. She'd seen him before, a silent, menacing presence in Luther's orbit. Mrs. Vale? So elusive. Thorne began, his voice smooth-cultured, yet utterly devoid of warmth. Mr. Vale has been extraordinarily worried about your well-being. Serafina instinctively pulled Finn, who had materialized silently beside her like a woodland spirit protectively behind her. I have nothing to say to Luther or to you. Merely a compassionate offer, Mrs. Vale. Mr. Vale is above all a generous man. Sign a simple statement you left of your own accord, overcome by emotional distress, perhaps some prepartum anxiety. You and the child will be discreetly and very comfortably provided for life. Otherwise, the unspoken threat chilled the damp evening air far more effectively than the approaching night. He is also aware that you kept certain digital souvenirs, shall we say. They are of no practical use to you, of course, but could prove quite damaging if mishandled, perhaps even to innocent parties. Think of the child's stable, secure future. His gaze flickered briefly, meaningfully towards Finn, who stood rigidly behind Serafina. Finn's small hand tightened its grip on the back of Serafina's shirt. My mother, Finn said, his voice surprisingly clear, steady and imbued with an unnerving gravity, chose her path. And some choices, Mr. Thorne, can't be bought or threatened away. Some storms aren't for destroying, they're for cleansing. Serafina squeezed the small hand, clinging to her drawing strength from his unexpected courage. I will speak to Luther, if at all, through my lawyers. She stated, her voice firmer than she felt. Thorne raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Lawyers against Luther Vale. He has a very long reach, Mrs. Vale, even to this quaint, isolated backwater. As he spoke, Serafina's peripheral vision caught a subtle movement in the dense tree line just beyond the porch light. A flicker of reflection off something metallic, too angular and deliberate for a deer or raccoon. Her blood ran cold. Thorne seemed to notice her gaze, a slight, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He protects his manifold interests, Mrs. Vale. Very, very thoroughly. He paused and then added almost as an afterthought, and he's particularly concerned about all his assets, current and potential. Another quick, cold glance at Finn. I've already survived. Very difficult, Mr. Serafina managed, stalling, her mind racing. Thorne. His resources, as I said, are vast. Consider his eminently reasonable offer. He or I will be in touch very soon. He gave a curt, dismissive nod, returned to the silent SUV, and vanished as quickly and silently as he had appeared. But as the red taillights disappeared down the track, Serafina, heart-pounding, saw them fresh, deep tire tracks running parallel to theirs on the muddy path, leading to the cabin, partially obscured by the SUV's passage, but undeniably there. More than one vehicle had been there very recently. They weren't just sending emissaries. They were scouting, or worse. Harlan returned an hour later, the old truck rattling to a halt. He took one look at Serafina's chalk-white face and Finn's rigid posture. "They found me." Serafina cried, the dam of her composure finally breaking. "A man named Thorn. He knew everything. He offered a deal, threatened the baby." Her voice broke as she recounted Thorn's veiled threats, his unnerving focus on her digital files, her terrifying sense of being watched from the woods and the other fresher tire tracks. Harlan listened, his face hardening into granite pieces, clicking into place with dreadful certainty. Abernathy's fishing. The precisely addressed envelope. Alara. Vanguard. Vale. Damn that greedy, treacherous old fool, Abernathy. He swore, slamming a fist onto the rough-hewn table. He's feeding Vale information for coin, damn his hide. He moved swiftly to the loose floorboard, retrieved his lockbox. Inside a burner phone, a thicker wad of cash than before, and Alara's old, well-oiled .38 revolver. "This isn't just for running anymore, Serafina," he said, his voice grim. "It's for fighting back." He then took out the small, heavy brass key, his gaze distant and pained. My sea chest. It was Alara's. There might be something in there. Something I overlooked years ago, something she might have documented. He followed her out to where she pointed out the faint, newer tire tracks, now starkly illuminated by his truck's headlamps. Tracks almost, but not quite, hidden by Thorn's more recent passage. His jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing. "They're testing, scouting the terrain, our vulnerabilities." A dangerous, desperate resolve burned in his eyes, a fire she hadn't seen before. "Tomorrow, first light, we practice with this." He indicated the revolver, "and we go over the trapper's trail again. You need to know how to use more than just your wits to survive what's coming." "I'm not leaving without you and Finn," she stated, a new unyielding steel in her own voice, surprising them both. "We face this together, or not at all." Harlan met her gaze, and a flicker of something akin to pride, respect, softened his harsh features. He nodded once sharply. The storm, the real one, was no longer coming. It was here. Rain began to lash the coast again after midnight, a torrential, violent downpour. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the small cabin to its foundations. Harlan stood at the main door, Alara's revolver held loosely, but ready in his hand, straining his ears against the roar of the elements for any unnatural sound, any telltale sign of their unseen watchers. Suddenly, Serafina gasped a sharp, piercing sound and doubled over, clutching her abdomen. "Harlan. Oh God. Harlan. It's happening. It's too soon. Way too soon." He was at her side in an instant. "Pains. How far apart? How strong?" 3, maybe 4 minutes. Oh God, they're coming fast and hard." He guided her carefully to the worn sofa near the hearth, his mind racing. "Okay. We're doing this here, Serafina. Right here. No hospital." She panted, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of fear. "Roads will be washed out by now. Flash floods in the hollows. We'd never make it. Not in this deluge." As if to punctuate his words, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the clearing, and through a momentary gap in the torrential rain and wind-lashed trees at the edge of their property, Harlan saw it, a sleek, dark vehicle, wipers struggling uselessly against the downpour. Not Thorn's SUV. Another one, parked, waiting, silent, ominous. "Finn, get the door barricaded with those spare timbers from the woodshed now," Harlan hissed, shoving the small, heavy oak table against the main window as an extra desperate shield. Then more urgently, "and check the back bolt at wedge the chairs. You've done this before." Serafina gasped between contractions, her face pale and beaded with sweat. "Once. A lifetime ago. A calf during a blizzard," he said grimly, trying for a reassurance he didn't feel. Finn, preternaturally calm amidst the escalating chaos, retrieved the medical kit they'd prepared, spreading clean towels Harlan had boiled earlier that week. "He's seen worse than a calf being born, Serafina." Harlan said, his voice tight with a strange mix of pride and sorrow. "He's a rock, this one. The storm is fierce." Finn said, his voice remarkably clear and steady over a momentary lull in the wind's howl as he checked the back door's barricade. "But it blinds those who wait in the dark as much as it protects us within its noise." Another flash of lightning. Serafina screamed a raw primal sound that was swallowed by a concurrent clap of thunder. Labor was progressing with brutal, terrifying speed. I can't do this," she sobbed. "Yes, you can, Serafina. You are strong. You swam through a bloody ocean. You can do this." Harlan's voice was a lifeline, firm and unwavering even as he risked a glance outside. The other vehicle hadn't moved, but he saw a brief, weak flashlight beam flicker and then die from the direction of the dense woods to the north of the cabin. They weren't just waiting. They were probing, testing their defenses under cover of the storm. He moved Ilara's revolver from his waistband to the small table beside the sofa chamber, checked ready. His senses were on fire, every nerve screaming. He could almost smell their patience, their menace. Then he heard it. A faint scraping sound from the back of the cabin, quickly followed by a soft thud like wood splintering. Finn placed a cool, damp cloth on Serafina's forehead. She grabbed his small hand, her fingers crushing his. He squeezed back his young face, a mask of resolute calm. Another agonizing push, a guttural cry torn from Serafina's soul. And then suddenly, cutting through the relentless roar of the storm, and Serafina's fading cry, a different sound, small, raw gasping, but defiantly alive. Harlan, his hands shaking, lifted the slippery, perfect baby, cleared her airway with a practiced movement he didn't know he still possessed, and quickly wrapped her in the cleanest towel they had. He laid her on Serafina's heaving chest. "A girl." He choked out, his voice thick with emotion. She's perfect. I didn't think we'd make it." Serafina wept tears of pain and relief and overwhelming love streaming down her face as she gazed at her daughter. "You did it, Serafina. You both did it. She's here. She's safe." Harlan gently wiped condensation from the window pane with his sleeve. No headlights from the probing vehicle were visible now. Not yet. But the dark, ominous shape of the other parked vehicle was still there, a malevolent shadow just beyond the tree line. He felt them, cold and calculating predators waiting for the storm, and their perceived opportunity to break. He was certain now they were being actively besieged. "Finn, keep watch at the front. Sing to your new sister something low and steady like Ilara used to sing. I need to reinforce that back window and the door. Now." The storm, for now, was their treacherous, double-edged shield. Dawn broke eventually, gray-bruised and exhausted. The rain had softened to a mournful drizzle. "Grace." Serafina whispered, her lips brushing her daughter's tiny, downy forehead. "Her name is Grace." Finn, who had barely slept, was already sketching them, a tiny, fierce light in his eyes. "She's going to change everything," he said with that unnerving, ageless certainty that sometimes sent a shiver down Harlan's spine. "She already has, Finn." Serafina murmured, her gaze locked on her daughter. "She already has." Later that morning, after checking the perimeter and finding more disturbing signs, a discarded energy bar wrapper near the tree line, a faint boot print in the mud too large to be his or Finn's. Harlan remembered the sleek, cream envelope Abernathy had given him. Deceit and menace wrapped in Luther's characteristic cold courtesy. "My dearest Serafina," it began. "I trust this finds you reconsidering. Return quietly with the child, who, while biologically mine, I understand you may currently feel is more akin to a burden given your emotional state. A most generous settlement awaits your signature, ensuring lifelong security for you both. Should you continue this foolish theatrical defiance, understand that I will pursue full legal custody. The courts, I assure you, will be wholly unsympathetic to a woman of your documented instability, especially one who has so recklessly endangered an unborn child. Your choice. Luther. Serafina read it, her face paling, but a spark of defiance lit her eyes. He's bluffing. He thinks he can scare me back into submission. He's not just bluffing, he's reaching. Harlan countered his gaze hard. Powerful cornered men like Vale only reach out with offers like this, however veiled in threats, when their absolute control begins to slip. When they fear what they can't directly crush. He finally took Alara's old sea chest down from the dusty attic space. Among faded photographs, dried wildflowers, and a child's tiny knitted booty was a slim, water-damaged, leather-bound journal. Alara's elegant, decisive hand. He passed it to Serafina, his heart aching. She read Alara's entries slowly, carefully accounts of Vanguard's illicit toxic waste dumping operations, hushed mentions of a secret meeting Alara had stumbled upon. Names blacked out or coded. Then near the end, a crucial, barely legible addendum. Serafina nearly missed the ink, faded and blurred by time or seawater. Abernathy mentioned today. A secure drop. LV apparently using his P.O. box for highly sensitive Vanguard personnel relocation, manifests, and payments. Something felt very wrong. He looked terrified when I pressed him, though he denied everything. More than just fear of Vale. It felt like guilt, too. What does he know? What is he hiding for LV? Harlan's face was a mask of stone. I did some freelance security consultant work for them years ago. Just after the Navy. Thought they were just another soulless shipping corporation. He told her then in quiet, clipped sentences about Alara's environmental activism, her growing suspicions about Vanguard's coastal operations, and her subsequent boating accident, so conveniently wiping away a persistent thorn in Vale's side. Alara's journal, especially that chilling note about Abernathy's fear and potential complicity, combined with Serafina's own digital evidence of Project Tidewash, painted an undeniable, far wider conspiracy than either of them had imagined. He thinks he can silence anyone who gets in his way. Harlan set his hand unconsciously resting on the revolver still on the table. He won't do it again. Not to you. Not to Grace. I have you now. She said, her voice soft but firm. And Finn. And Grace. We have the truth. Ilara's truth. Your truth. Then maybe it's time we stop hiding in the shadows. Harlan said, a dangerous, almost reckless light in his eyes, and start fighting in the daylight. Ilara's note about Abernathy. His fear, his guilt. That's leverage. Maybe he has more than just a guilty conscience hiding behind that folksy facade. A new resolve settled over Serafina. She asked for her digital files, carefully retrieving the tiny waterproofed USB drive she had painstakingly stitched into the hem of her tattered dress before Luther's final furious confrontation on the yacht. Finn, who had been listening intently, handed her a new sketch, a perfect serene image of baby Grace, held tenderly by a woman who looked like a queen, flanked protectively by a fierce-looking Harlan and a watchful Finn, with storm hearts shining all around them. Underneath, Finn had written, "She'll always have us, and we'll always have her. Justice for Alara, safety for Grace, a future for Finn, a life for herself." The fight was no longer just for survival. It was for all of them. The next day, armed with a fragile new hope and a grim determination, they drove the treacherous, storm-damaged coastal road to Seaview. Serafina with Harlan, standing as a silent, formidable guardian beside her. met a tenacious, overworked legal aid lawyer Harlan knew from his union days. She initiated proceedings: spousal abuse, a restraining order against Luther Vale, attempted murder, and crucially a detailed addendum citing Vanguard Shipping's illegal operations, the suspicious circumstances of Alara Crow's death, and the potential coercion and corruption of postal officials in concealing criminal activity. She requested full sole custody of Grace. When the lawyer, a pragmatic woman named Miss Albright, asked about protective services or witness protection, Serafina managed a small, confident smile. "I already have it," she said, her gaze flicking to Harlan. Before leaving Seaview, Harlan, his face a grim mask, confronted Abernathy privately in the back room of the post office. Armed with the precise wording from Alara's journal and the old man's visible terror, he pressed. The terrified postmaster, his folksy demeanor shattering like cheap glass, confessed everything. Not just being a paid informant relaying messages and information to Vale's contacts for years. Not just noting who received mail from certain investigative journalists or environmental groups. He admitted, his voice choked with tears and decades of fear, to having received a sealed heavy packet from Alara Crow herself the very day before her accident. Her instructions had been chillingly clear: mail it to a renowned investigative journalist at a national paper if anything happened to her. He'd been too scared of what Vale was capable of. He'd hidden it, praying it would never be needed. Now trembling, he retrieved the dusty, unopened package from a locked compartment beneath a loose floorboard. It contained irrefutable proof copies of internal Vanguard memos, shipping manifests, with falsified cargo declarations, and worse, direct signed orders from Luther Vale himself for several accidents at sea, including the one that had killed a key whistleblower. Alara had been trying to help a man whose family had been destroyed. And then Abernathy revealed one more thing, his voice barely a whisper, something that made Harlan's blood run cold. Alara. She wasn't always alone when she came in. Sometimes she had a boy with her. Small, quiet, dark hair. Right before she died, she came in frantic. Gave me this. He fumbled in another drawer, pulling out a small, tarnished silver locket shaped like a tiny closed clamshell. She said, "If they get me, find Harlan Crow. Give him this. Tell him to look for Clara's legacy." She whispered about a sister of Vale's, one who defied him, and vanished. She was terrified, said Vale would stop at nothing to erase threats. Abernathy looked at Harlan. "She made me swear to find you if..." His voice trailed off. Harlan stared at the locket. Clara's legacy, Finn. The revelation about Finn's possible connection to Alara, and by extension to Luther Vale's estranged sister Clara, was a seismic shock. Alara had been protecting more than just evidence. She had been protecting a child, possibly Vale's own kin. This recontextualized everything: Vale's reach, Thorne's veiled comments about other assets, and Alara's desperate courage. Harlan kept this new explosive piece of information to himself, for now needing time to process its staggering implications. The locket Abernathy gave him felt heavy in his pocket. Life at the cabin evolved, forged in shared adversity and a growing, unspoken affection. Grace thrived, a small, resilient beacon of light in their fractured world. Finn, under Serafina's gentle encouragement, began to talk more, even laugh. He built Grace a beautiful cradle from driftwood, painstakingly carving her name alongside intricate patterns of waves and shining storm hearts. Harlan, grimly pragmatic, taught Serafina to shoot Alara's revolver. "Some storms don't come with clouds and rain, Serafina." He'd set his eyes dark. "Some come wearing $1,000 suits and carrying briefcases full of lies." One evening, as Serafina rocked a sleeping Grace by the fire, the sound of the ocean a soothing balm, She said quietly, "You saved my life, Harlan." He looked up from oiling the revolver, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. "You saved your own Serafina. Your will to live for her, that's what got you through that water." "No," she insisted gently. "You pulled me from the water when I had nothing left. You gave me shelter. You trusted me when I was just a half-drowned stranger. You and Finn, you gave us a chance." His rugged features softened a rare, genuine vulnerability in his eyes. "Didn't rightly know what I was saving back then, or who. I know now." She reached out her hand, covering his, and leaned her head briefly on his strong shoulder. A fragile sense of peace, of being claimed by courage, by unexpected love, by this improbable chosen family, settled over her. In early September, as the coastal winds began to carry the first hint of autumn's chill, Serafina found her mother's antique seashell locket tangled in a salvaged piece of fishing netting Harlan used for his crab traps. It was the one thing she'd been wearing apart from her dress that had survived the ocean. "I found it in your hair that first morning," Harlan confessed gruffly when she showed it to him, tears in her eyes. "Tucked it away, cleaned it up a bit. Didn't want to give you more painful reminders until you were ready. You don't have to erase your past, Serafina. Just learn to carry it differently, lighter maybe." The locket Abernathy had given him, Ilara's locket for Clara's legacy, remained in his pocket, a secret weight. He wasn't ready to share that burden yet, not until he understood it himself. She asked him more about Ilara, then, sensing his pain was deeper, more complex than just grief. "I didn't become someone else after she was gone," he said, his voice rough with remembered anguish, his gaze fixed on the distant, turbulent horizon. "I just stopped being myself for a long, long time. Now," he turned to look at her, a faint new light in his eyes. "With you, with Grace, with Finn, finally seeming a bit more like a kid. I'm remembering how. Remembering who I was supposed to be." She smiled, a warmth spreading through her. "You're more whole than you know, Harlan Crow." The next day she wore her mother's locket. Badge of survival, Harlan approved quietly, a small, almost imperceptible nod. October brought crisp, clear days and starlit nights. Serafina began to write again, poetry. Mostly words that bled onto the page raw and honest. Finn blossomed under her quiet tutelage, and Harlan's gruff affection, his art, filled with a newfound vibrancy. Grace's happy gurgles and occasional delighted laughter filled the small cabin, chasing away the last of the shadows. One starlit night, sitting on the porch swing wrapped in an old quilt, Grace asleep in Serafina's arms, Harlan whispered, his voice barely audible above the sigh of the surf. This all started with a storm, a goddamn nightmare, and somehow it ended up with this. He gestured vaguely at the peaceful scene at their small, unconventional family. "You think we're at the end, Harlan?" Serafina asked softly, looking up at him. He met her gaze, his eyes clear and deep in the moonlight. "No, Serafina." He said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I reckon we're just at the beginning." His kiss, when it came, was as gentle and steadfast as the tide, a quiet promise of dawn after the longest night. "So this," she breathed, her heart full, "this is what safe feels like." He held her closer. "No, Serafina, this is what home feels like." Later that week, under the glow of a kerosene lamp, Serafina wrote in a new journal, one Harlan had crafted for her from salvaged leather and handmade paper. Home isn't just a place, four walls and a roof. It's not an escape from the storm, but the lighthouse you build in its aftermath. It's where we discover, fight for, and ultimately become who we were always meant to be. It's the courage to love again after everything. Snow dusted the Oregon coast 18 years later. Grace Vale poised and articulate, her mother's fire in her eyes, and Harlan's quiet strength in her bearing held a thick embossed invitation, Northwest Pacific Leadership Forum. Keynote youth speaker, Ms. Grace Vale. Topic: building empathy and ethical frameworks into modern business practices. Hosted with a cruel irony that was not lost on any of them at the newly christened Vale Global Industries Conference Center. You don't owe them or him your story, Grace, Serafina said gently, watching her daughter dress. But if you choose to tell any part of it, make sure it's undeniably wholly yours. Harlan, his weathered face etched with pride, drove her to the city. Finn, now a respected, fiercely independent investigative journalist whose byline was already making waves, would meet them there. He'd been meticulously and very quietly digging into Luther Vale's empire and its history for years, driven by a deep personal need for answers Harlan now suspected was linked to the locket Alara had left. I wouldn't be who I am without you, Mom, and without Harlan or Finn, Grace said from the passenger seat, looking out at the familiar wild coastline rushing past. You taught me everything that matters. You are who you are because of your heart, Grace. Harlan said, his voice gruff with emotion. Your mom, Finn, and I, we just gave you strong roots and a safe harbor to grow from. Backstage before her speech, a very frail elderly man, leaning heavily on an elegant ebony cane, approached her. Luther Vale. His eyes, though faded, still held a glint of their former steel. I always imagined, he said, his voice a dry rasp, that if I ever had a daughter, she'd look more like me. I don't, Grace replied calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. A pained, almost wistful smile touched his thin lips. No, thankfully, you have your mother's fire and her indomitable courage. I'm not here for you, Mr. Vale. Grace stated, her voice polite but firm. I know that, my dear. That's precisely why I asked to see you. He slowly extended a trembling hand, holding out a faded, yellowed envelope. I wrote this many weeks after that terrible storm. I never sent it. Pride, perhaps. Cowardice, most certainly. He then produced a newer, crisper envelope from his coat pocket. This one is more recent, more practical. Grace didn't take them immediately. Instead, she reached into her own pocket and placed a small folded square of frayed, faded blue flannel, a piece from one of Finn's treasured baby blankets that Serafina had kept, on the polished table between them. My mother kept this, Grace said, her voice clear and strong. Through everything she endured, she believed there was something in me in the future worth saving, worth fighting for. Not because of who my biological father was or what he possessed, but because of who she and Harlan and Finn wanted me to become. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering. I forgive you, Mr. Vale. For my sake, not yours. I refuse to carry the weight of your sins, your choices any longer. He closed his eyes for a long moment, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down his deeply lined cheek. A heavy burden indeed, he whispered. Thank you, Grace. On stage, Grace began, her voice resonating with a quiet power that captivated the large audience. I was born into a storm, both literal and metaphorical. But storms, by their very nature, are temporary. What truly matters, what defines us, is what we choose to build in their aftermath from the wreckage and the resilience. Later that evening, back in their modest hotel room, Grace opened the newer envelope first. It contained legal papers. Luther Vale, who had passed away peacefully in his sleep just hours after their brief, momentous meeting, had altered his will. Grace Vale was named his sole heir, his entire personal estate, and more significantly, the controlling shares of Vale Global Industries, a sum north of $180 million. Harlan's voice when Grace called him. And Serafina, back at the cabin, was steady over the speakerphone. "That's a world of money, Gracie. A tool or a trap. Make absolutely sure it doesn't end up costing you more in spirit than it gives you in means." Back at the cabin a few days later, she told them everything. His lawyer said his only regret at the end was that he didn't want to be remembered only as a villain. He wanted one act to speak louder than the rest. "He's trying, perhaps," Serafina said thoughtfully, in the only language he truly understood power and its transfer. It was Finn, his face alight with the fervor of a journalist, who has finally cracked a long, cold case, who then revealed his own recent, astonishing findings. Luther had a younger sister, Clara Vale. Finn began spreading out old photographs and documents on the cabin table. She was fiercely principled, openly defied him over his ruthless business practices and treatment of workers decades ago. He disinherited her. She vanished, taking her young son with her. Luther, according to his private journals, that his lawyer allowed me to see, searched for her or her children for years, secretly, obsessively, fruitlessly. His private investigators always hit dead ends. The lawyer mentioned Luther felt his only true family line, the one untainted by his own corrosive ambition, had ended with Clara's defiance and disappearance. This information, which Finn had pieced together after Harlan had finally shown him the locket Alara left, and the name Clara's legacy, cast Luther's immense bequest to Grace in a new, profoundly more complex light. It wasn't just guilt about Serafina. It was perhaps a desperate 11th-hour attempt to foster a legacy of principled, compassionate action through a descendant, even one born of his own treachery, as a form of atonement for the family, the lineage he himself had driven away. Finn looked at Harlan, then at the faded clamshell locket Serafina had passed to him years ago after Abernathy. Alara knew. She was trying to protect me, my grandmother's legacy. Harlan, that locket Abernathy gave you, the one Alara wanted you to have, it was my grandmother Clara's. She gave it to my mother, who gave it to Alara. Harlan finally understood the depth of Alara's sacrifice. Finn was Clara Vale's grandson, the legacy Alara wanted him to find. Grace absorbed this staggering revelation, the pieces of her own identity clicking into a new, more complete picture. A foundation, yes. That had always been her plan for any inheritance. But now it had a name, a deeper mission. The Waves of Grace Foundation. A sanctuary for refuge, a beacon for healing, a wellspring for empowerment. And a key personal mission to compassionately search for and, if found, support any other lost descendants of Clara Vale. She formally accepted the estate, immediately transferring the vast majority of its liquid assets and future profits from the controlling shares of Vale Global Industries into the newly established foundation. Then, with a sense of trepidation and duty, she opened Luther's older yellowed letter. Grace, it read, the script surprisingly shaky. "I won't pretend I deserve your forgiveness, or anyone's. My life was built on a flawed, corrupt foundation. My sister Clara, she was the best of us. I pushed her away because she saw the rot in me and what I was building. I have spent a lifetime regretting that and her loss. I see whispers of her unyielding spirit in what your mother told the lawyers about you, about her hopes for you. I can only pray that through this unintended, violent conflagration of events, I might have inadvertently given you something substantial, something good to build with, something Clara would have approved of. I am glad my actions, as monstrous as they were, didn't stop you from becoming who you are. L. A fragile, almost invisible thread of connection, of remorse, stretched across the abyss of years and pain. The news of Clara, her courage, and Finn's direct lineage spurred Grace further. Finn, his own quiet quest for identity, now finding a new focus, presented Grace with a meticulously carved wooden model of Harlan's cabin, a tiny LED light glowing warmly from within its windows. On its base, he'd also carved a tiny, perfect tide-worn compass. A family heirloom he now understood was his by birthright, a compass Clara had given her son, who had passed it to Alara for safekeeping for Finn. "For your new office, Director Vale." He set a rare, wide grin on his face. Grace laughed, tears in her eyes. "I know exactly where its main office will be, and it won't be in any Vale Global Tower." Spring bloomed along the Oregon coast, painting the bluffs with wildflowers. The Waves of Grace Retreat and Healing Center launched on a magnificent, windswept bluff overlooking the Pacific, not far from Harlan and Serafina's now expanded, renovated cabin. Harlan, his arm around Serafina, stood proudly at the podium during the opening ceremony. Grace didn't just grow up here on this coast. He said, his voice thick with emotion, his gaze sweeping over the gathered crowd of supporter staff and a few of the first women and children the foundation was helping. "She grew us all up, too. She and her mother and Finn taught an old broken man that being shattered isn't an ending. It just means there's a hell of a lot more space for something new, something better to grow." Grace followed him, her mother's seashell locket gleaming at her throat, a smooth, gray storm heart clutched in one hand, and the tiny, ancient tide-worn compass, now attached to her locket's chain, resting against her heart. "My mother, Serafina, more than 18 years ago, pregnant and alone, swam through an impossible storm towards something she couldn't see, couldn't possibly imagine. She found a man with calloused, gentle hands, a quiet, wise boy who listened more than he spoke. A tiny, resilient cabin that became a sanctuary. From that storm I was born. Born into a love that shows up early, stays late, and never ever gives up. This coast, this cabin, this family, they were my rescue, my first home. Now with all our hearts, we hope this place—" She gestured to the beautiful, sustainably built retreat center behind her, "will become a safe harbor, a place of profound healing for someone else's new beginning." That evening, sitting on the wide porch of the main retreat lodge with Serafina, Harlan, and Finn watching the sunset paint the ocean in fiery hues, Grace whispered, "I'll come back every season. No matter where the foundation takes me, this will always be the heart, the true north." Later, alone at the shoreline, as the first stars began to prick the darkening sky, Grace touched her mother's locket, the storm heart, in her palm, and the ancient compass that had guided so many. Serafina, Alara, Clara. Women of fierce spirit and unyielding courage, unknowingly connected across time and tragedy, now intentionally, powerfully linked by Grace's love and unwavering resolve. "I was never truly lost," she whispered to the vast eternal waves. "I was just waiting for the tide to turn,